Hello, Joseph. Thank you so much for being a part of my program and talking to me.
Yes, it is my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Could you
So,
say a little bit about yourself?
sure. So first of all, thanks for this little opportunity that came out of the blue, but maybe not out of this world, as we may be talking very soon. So I was quite pleased. So myself, I'm here based in Malta. I'm an academic and a professor at the University of Malta. And my main topics or subjects include biochemistry and molecular biology and genetics. And then my field of research, very specifically, is on blood genetics. And this includes normal blood physiology and including blood diseases like sickle cell anemia or thalassemia. So those are my main areas of interest. And of course, on the side, or not too much on the side, I also have a passion for space science.
Yeah, I've also read that you're interested in maybe figuring out some type of genetic adaptation to help people survive, the high radiation,
Yes.
the other aspects of maybe expanding out into the solar system.
Yes. So in fact, first of all, in a much more practical manner, so despite having a passion for space science, myself and a few colleagues of mine in Malta put the passion to practice. And in fact, I brought it with me today. I have a small cube here.
Oh,
And
cool.
this tiny cube is destined to leave next month in August on a SpaceX mission to the International Space Station. So this is SpaceX CRS-23. And it will be taking, for the very first time, a Maltese biomedical experiment to the space station. So in Malta, here is some sort of hype to see what happens and how this experiment will unfold. I mean, in terms of science, much before me, experiments have been sent to the space station and back. This marks a first, and we shall be looking at some specific cells, bacterial cells, that belong to patients that suffer diabetes, and very specifically, diabetic foot ulcers. I will not be too much technical, but that's the experiment overall. And then something interesting that we came by was to share this passion, which with as much or as many people as possible. We also went to primary schools and secondary schools, and we invited the kids and children to think of something, think of a message, and the message or artwork or design or painting, we offer a space on our hard disk, on our SD card of the cube, and we will actually take their contribution to the space station, and then we can air that from space back to Earth. So I think this tries to captivate as much interest as possible with the young generation. Yes, since my area is genetics, of course, so it doesn't take too much to realize that the environment around us affects our body, our genetics, okay? And depending on one's genetics, one is able to withstand certain environmental situations than others, because each and every person has his own genetic identity. And of course, this genetic identity, which probably is also translated in the astronauts themselves when they visit space and back. Some go for 3 months, some go for 6 months, some go for 12 months. And we know, scientifically and published, we know that space changes the body's physiology or the response to the microgravity. It has some sort of effects on muscle, on bone, on vision. So we know all this. So what struck me from your project, and especially to mark the landing of humans on Moon, and especially when they say going to the Moon and stay, or going to the Moon and Mars. So not so much is discussed about how people can be well adapted to the change. So I think with respect to genetics and some form of medicine or therapy or conditioning, as you like, in order to make it safer for astronauts to be on the moon and on Mars, I think it's a hugely important topic, and it is very, very underrated, I believe. So that's my main idea of how this genetics will feature now and in the future of space missions, I would say.
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, the idea of maybe artificially adapting people to the space environment is one thing, but I wanted to ask you about natural adaptation. Like there's you mentioned that some people are um, uh, you know, adapted to certain environments and other people aren't. Are there a set of genes that you would consider to be astronaut genes?
Okay, that's a very, very interesting question. So I think this field is very much in its infancy, but gaining traction. There definitely are genes that can be considered as favorable traits to being or becoming a more efficient astronaut, I would say. I think some of these genes would entail the ability to carry more oxygen in blood as opposed to carrying less. So that makes a person more able to withstand certain stresses or certain, I think it is some sort of a stress environment. So all that has to do with blood. In fact, it is interesting to mention that spending a long time in space, 3 months or more, there is a form of anemia that kicks in, which is called a space anemia. I mean, the red blood cells do not really enjoy it much being in space, and the destruction of red cells is more frequent in space than on Earth, and therefore that results in a form of anemia. Of course, there are many lessons to be learned because on Earth there are conditions that or diseases that predispose a person to become anemic, and there are medications and genes that how do you say facilitate that person to overcome the anemia. So we call these modifier genes, and there are a handful of genes. I can mention a few, like KLF1 or BCL11A. So these are important genes that affect the development of red blood cells. So of course, the better genetic makeup you have and the less DNA variants you have in these genes, the more better adapted or better suited you are. There might be, I'm sure there are genes responsible for muscle buildup or make one prone to have less muscle breakdown. I think that's important. The same goes for bone, because the longer you stay in space, bone starts to become more perhaps brittle or lose its composition. So there are traits that facilitate or enable a person to withstand more the loss of bone cells or bone resorption. So for sure that I think there will be a time very soon that astronauts, be it country astronauts, public astronauts funded by governments, or private astronauts, probably they will start to benefit from having some form of profiling being done, and in so doing, they are given an assessment or a score of where they stand and how better suited they are to stay 3 months, 6 months, a year. Maybe from all Earth, we can identify people who can withstand much more. That is an interesting observation to be made. So that's for sure. And then another interesting area, which of course I mentioned briefly, is that if a person is not well adapted, there are and there might be ways how to condition the body and make him or her withstand the space environment. And by conditioning, I mean, I don't want to how do you say, panic people or alarm people, but there could be some form of gene therapy or genetic enhancing technologies. I mean, these are being used right now to treat serious conditions, and if left untreated, some people can actually die. So genetic therapy is actually very, very critical and important on Earth. So trying to harness its potential for use in space can be, in my opinion, a logical or a natural step. Of course, there will be questions, of course, there will be ethics, but I think this is all part of a healthy debate. I think it's important. I think it's important.
Absolutely. And whenever you talk about space anemia, I had not heard that before, but just thinking about the various factors. I mean, you got like the weightlessness, the high radiation, the stress, but also I understand from Scott Kelly's book, A Year in Space, that is actually a high carbon dioxide environment. That they don't, you know, he could really feel the difference whenever new astronauts showed up and put that additional kind of
Sure.
load on the system. So I was
Sure.
wondering if any of those factors you thought were particularly the primary cause for space anemia, or if it's something else.
For sure, because the important gas exchange that takes place on board the space station would definitely impinge on the red cell normal cycle, so to say. And of course, there are other factors as well. So there are other hormones or proteins that are expressed or generated by the body, which will exacerbate hemolysis in blood. And definitely what you just mentioned just right now, so the radiation and the microgravity environment itself. So all these are external contributing factors for red cells to be destroyed. And generally, there might be some form of feedback mechanism, because the more red cells are destroyed, the body tries to compensate by making more. But of course, the body is still subject to continue lysing those red cells. So there can be a form of a vicious cycle. However, it is impressive. It is impressive how in not how do you say, in not a wide variation, so to say, but in a short span of time, the body starts to adapt and compensate for those factors that kick in. So the same goes for when they return back to Earth. So it's like the body, first there's the first shock of sending the body to space, and then there needs to be a number of weeks for the body to adapt and stabilize for the changes and becomes adapted. And then the body needs to come back on Earth and has to come to terms again with the Earth conditions. So it's actually two types of stress and shocks that the body endures. And I think we learn a lot. We learn a lot from this.
I mean, you talk about human genetics, but I think over the course of the past few decades, we've really come to a realization that humans are composed of way more genes than just what's in their DNA. You have this whole host of bacteria that inhabit and contribute and affect their well-being. And I
Yes.
was wondering if you've done any research or thinking about how that genome could be studied and altered to make people more able to withstand space.
That is really interesting. In fact, you just said it. So a human is a human, and we are made up of trillions of cells. However, on all our skin, inside the mouth or the oral cavity, inside our guts, we are full of bacteria, and we call this the microbiome because it is a collection of different bacterial types. And in fact, they play critical roles for a healthy immune system of the body, and to ensure that food gets digested properly, to prevent illnesses. So they're hugely important. These microbiomes tend to vary, of course, with the effects of space. And in fact, the studies of these types of microbiomes, especially from astronauts, I believe it is an ongoing project right now, and there already are scientific contributions that have been published. Myself, I do not work directly with microbiomes of astronauts. However, the experiment that we are sending from Malta is indeed one type of microbiome that is on skin, but it belongs to a particular group of patients who are suffering a disease. We want to, in fact, study the behavior of this microbiome. So it will be like a three-way experiment, okay? So we're going to study the composition of the bacteria and microbiome from day 0 on Earth. And then we will study the same cells at day 50 or day 60 when they are in space and back, and the same cells on Earth at day 60. So these will be 3 different points, and we will be looking at the important changes of DNA, RNA, crosstalk between the cells. So that's a huge area of interest. And I also was pleased to hear you say that okay, so we are humans, we have our own genome, there are the important microbiomes. However, even the person's own genome, okay, 3% of which is coded by genes, okay? The rest are not genes, but most of them are known what are called as non-coding RNA. So these segments of DNA are sort of read, they are transcribed. So there is an intermediary product, but they never form genes, proteins. But these intermediary products play critical roles in cell health, cell cycle progression, crosstalk between different types of cell and tissue types. And this area still is an area of great discoveries being made monthly, I would say, if not weekly. And of course, in the context of space, how these very peculiar or special intermediary molecules, how they behave, what is their role in space. I think there's a lot waiting to be discovered, I'm sure.
I mean, I think Kennedy said when he was talking about the moon program that as our knowledge increases, the shore of our ignorance increases faster, or something like that.
True, that is true, I would say, because it is incredible. Okay, even talking about normal science, okay, in a typical lab, when you ask a question and you devise your experiments, you design your experiment, you do the research, you will obtain results and answers. But generally, with the answers that you get back, you will then ask 2 more questions or 3 more questions. So you discover how, in fact, things which are seemingly simple or straightforward are in fact not. So that's incredible.
So, I mean, microbes and engineered life is going to be critical for actually creating environments for humans to live in. There's a lot of controversy about using such things on Mars because there may already be life there that we haven't discovered that we want to find. Venus, up until last year, I think everybody thought was completely dead and there wasn't any risk of it. But I think they're coming around to thinking that maybe there's still no risk of it. What do you think about creating like some type of extremophile bacteria or something that you could seed Venus with that would mass produce and kind of tame the atmosphere?
Yes. I think all of this is like larger than life itself, right? I mean, life as we know it or as we understand it, because no one really knows the context of life somewhere else, what it entails. But we go along by definition of having amino acids or DNA nucleotides as the basic constituents of life. So we might not need to stay specifically engineering extremophiles because Earth or scientists are lucky enough that we do have extremophiles in certain areas of the world, and this is incredible. This could be in the hot springs. I believe even in the States that there might be an area of hot springs, and there are specific bacteria that live there, like Thermus aquaticus, and then there are other bacteria that withstand very high doses of radiation, like the famous radiodurans, Deinococcus. So these can actually withstand high levels of radiation. And I believe there were experiments that for a certain degree of time, they can also survive the vacuum of space itself. So these are as extreme as it can get. Now on the question of having a seemingly planet which is sterile, and us who will be contaminating it, one could say, to the benefit to see how life adapts or how it evolves. I think in all honesty, it is only a matter of when, but not if, because I mean this idea of exploration, so one could argue on a human level, whereby we used to live in the confines of continental Europe, okay, and then at one point people wanted to go and explore new worlds. They thought actually it was a new continent, right? New continents, and they discovered the Americas, and they discovered North Americas or Australia, and other islands. Some islands were completely uninhabited, and they were occupied by the visiting explorers. Some islands or lands or continents were already occupied by indigenous people of the land. And then, I mean, history is colorful, no? There were occasions where the explorers were repelled, no, they were sent back. There were occasions where the explorers actually acted to conquer and take that land and drive off the local endemic people, the indigenous people. And there might have been cases where there was coexistence of the new and the old. I think it might seem fantasy, but I would say that the colonization or visiting of other planets, be it Venus or the clouds of Venus, or Mars, I think it will be one of these three examples I just said. So either people or bacteria will be sent and there is absolutely nothing, and they will sort of live off the land if they survive. We might go and there might be remnants of past life, which is very good for historical and study purposes. I think there will be enough resources to study for 100 more years. And there can be some form of coexistence. Again, we might laugh or smile, but by coexistence, I mean with today's technology or with tomorrow's technology, I cannot exclude that extinct life, which we do not see now, probably might be brought back to life using the tools that we have. And we can go as close as having recently extinct animals, like some special or rare tigers or other animals. And some people are now working on the mammoth, woolly mammoth DNA. And some crazy people might think of dinosaurs as well. There's no reason why if and only if there is some form of remains or nucleic acid blueprints on other planets, if that can be brought to life, it is certainly possible, but by no means easy, of course.
Now, as we do like genetic research on bacteria and viruses and fungi and other things, there's always a risk of that somehow contaminating our environment. In fact, there's some speculation that maybe COVID-19 is an example of such a breach. And whether or not there's any evidence for that or not, there's always the possibility that you could have some type of experiment get out of the lab. And when you have a facility on the Earth with people coming and going every day, and you have things happening, earthquakes, storms, what have you, there's always that risk. But I was thinking if that research was actually done in a facility on the moon or someplace else, you have a really big gap between,
Containment.
you have very big containment between your Earth biome and whatever your experimentation is.
Yes, yes, yes. That is certainly possible, doable, for sure. If you're looking at something which is out of this world, probably it is out of reach. So the harassing factor or the problem is further away. But I mean the way how science is working and how space exploration is working. And I think COVID-19 gives us a very, very important lesson here, because most, if not all, of the world's spread has happened because of traveling, be it on land, be it on flights or sea. And the way we are working with space exploration, it might not be an everyday flight, but flights to space station and to moon, possibly to Mars. It will not be once in a blue moon to talk about moons, or once a year, but I would envisage that there will be frequent travel. And with frequent travel, you will start to introduce that possible contamination or breach. So if anything, COVID-19 has a lot of lessons to be learned. Even this idea of containment levels or laboratories, I mean, it's a very, very complex situation. I think to be completely honest, although this is very apolitical, right? I think when it comes to dealing with human life, and you have hundreds, thousands, and now I think we are millions of people that are being inflicted, and some pass away with the disease, I think we are better off focusing our energy for treating, curing, and trying to mitigate all this, rather than seeing how these breaches have occurred. I think again, I think the world, or scientists, or the biomedical world can never be over prepared, so you need to be over and above in terms of preparation. I also know and believe that these pandemics form part of a natural cycle of the world. So 100 years ago was the famous Spanish flu, which killed millions and millions all over the world. I think 100 years before that, there was another form of pandemic. So I mean, we should not be too surprised that we are living in a pandemic, and we only have ourselves to blame if we were ill prepared. Okay, so these things should be taken seriously, and there's no excuse to be ill prepared. I mean that's a main message I wanted to convey as well in that aspect. And of course, for people who are enthusiastic in exploring new worlds or new territories, I mean, these types of pandemics pose a lot of setbacks, right? And it resonates with people, and they're right that they are mostly more concerned on their neighbor's health or their own health than thinking about somebody's health in space. So there's absolutely no comparison at all. So we have to get our acts together right on Earth. And in so doing, we can explore much faster and much further in space.
Yeah, it's pandemics might be the only environmental factor that is effective at natural selection. It seems like all the other environmental factors we've overcome through creating our own little artificial environments and supply chains and things like that. I mean, no longer do you have to be running fast and go to the sphere in order to eat. You just have to be able to go down to the shopping mall and have some
True,
papers to give to them to get the food. So
true, true, true. And in fact, this is interesting. So this what might be common as well in the medical field and pandemics and infection and space technology. So going by the rules of biology and Darwin rules, so it's not necessarily the brightest or the strongest or the healthiest. It is all a matter of adaptation. The one who manages to adapt to the environment is the one which will persist and will live. So adaptation is a very, very important trait that humans and animals have developed over hundreds and thousands of years. And I think we can learn a lot how to strengthen or further enhance the adaptation process. And space would give us that fertile ground to explore, to do research, and how to see how the body or animals, how to adapt to an ever-changing environment. I think the beauty of research here is completely ignored by the large segment of population, but probably, again, I point this to the educators or the top level people who possibly work or research in this field, because there is not so much public knowledge or education, or teaching. I mean, this is not a everyday conversation that people do when they're waiting on a bus stop or catching the train. But I think the subject is very, in my opinion, is very exciting and interesting, and there should be more of talk on this topic, even just to instill some sort of passion or excitement to the people. Like, listen, there's much more to space and research than just having to burden ourselves with this COVID-19 virus and with this particular disease. I mean, science is a huge thing. And I mean, science is all around us. So the technology we use, the food we eat, I think everything is based on science.
absolutely. And as you were talking, I was thinking how, and I've been struggling with this, with exploring this with my programs. How do you actually penetrate into the the mainstream of human conversation and thought and things about this? And sports is really good. We have the Tokyo Olympics going on right now, and you have the football, and you have a whole bunch of other things. Um, what do you think about artificial genetic Olympics type thing, where on like the small scale, you can have teams of scientists creating bacteria and seeing which one can conquer a certain area faster than the other, or
Yes,
something like that. And
yes,
you can have the
yes, yes.
sports commentators and everything going.
I think, but I don't know offhand. I think there are some form of hackathons or marathons for sure in the IT world. And I think on a molecular biology level, there are some form of hackathons or marathons being done. I believe in the States, there were some very interesting type of marathons that engage a large number of small teams that come from different universities or schools and pose them with a problem, and they need to design a fast experiment, possibly also involving molecular biology skills. So that is a very interesting way how to convey knowledge. Probably, however, the attendees would mostly be very much biased on the biology world. Now that you mention this idea of Olympics, so I think, of course, it's not easy. However, these world events, be it Euro Cup or World Cup or Olympics, these are world events. And almost all the world with a TV or radio will be watching or hearing. So if there can be some form of message being conveyed, which is at a scientific level, I think if the scientific community, whatever discipline or area it is, if it can penetrate these world events, it will be a huge, how do you say, huge feat, huge thing to drive further the public's interest in science and research and appreciate more. And I think even though there's a large number of skeptics, of course, but I think the pandemic has shown how a large number of people who never knew about DNA or RNA or the word PCR, to test the virus RNA. I mean, now even my parents or even my aunts know what a PCR is. And if you had to ask me this question 2 years ago, of course, they have no idea what a PCR is. I mean, it's a very technical word. We do this in the lab, in the genetics lab. And the person who discovered PCR was awarded the Nobel Prize in the 1960s, I believe. So it's amazing how world events bring about highlights or certain aspects that people will start to relate to. So yes, so we should be on the lookout for this. And if there are influential people who have a stake in these world events, that would be definitely a good way forward to have a wide reach.
Oh, I had one of my standard questions for you. If it was safe and affordable, would you go to space?
Tell me again, sorry, tell me again.
If it was safe and affordable, would you go to space?
For sure.
How far would you go? Would you just like a suborbital trip like Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos, or
I
to the
believe in
moon?
all the way.
All the
So,
way.
so moon is definite, and Mars could be an option.
That's awesome. Well, I see this as a time capsule for people not even born yet. You know, people 100 years, 200 years from now, looking back on this time as we're about to take these new steps to the moon and continue a journey further beyond that, which I think will change our perception of what's possible than what's normal. Like you were talking about earlier, common travel to the moon and other places. Right now, we live in a world sort of like the Wright brothers lived in, where they could see the possibility of airplane flight, but nobody else could. And
Exactly.
but then once it
Exactly.
happened, everybody's like it's common. So
Exactly.
and then
Exactly.
you kind of lost their
For
skepticism. You
sure.
lost the vision. It just become part of the environment, you know.
Exactly. You are 100% right. Right, brothers. Yeah, you are. You are.
So with that perspective in mind, is there anything about our current times, our current situation that you think would be good to kind of remark on, to kind of capture for this post space
Okay.
era?
Okay. That's a very good question. I have a pretty much standard way of how to reason this thing. So it is now obvious that NASA and a host of other space agencies from all over the world will be going to the moon. So they say boots on the ground and to stay. It's very also interesting to see that there will be another gender on the moon now. So we're looking at the first female as well. Yes, and of course there is the trip from moon to Mars. So this is all about humans as we know them. Right now, I see a lack of biomedical life science research between Earth to moon, moon to Mars. So this is a very serious gap. I hope that huge space organizations are looking at this seriously. And I say this because in the context of a medical field or medical research, most of the lessons learned are from animal models, cell models, okay? So cell models that are of different type, okay? And we learn awfully a lot. And based on the results that we get, we can better prepare or condition or enhance a future trip. So I would say that to make it easier, okay, not necessarily not doable, because I mean sending people to Moon or Mars is a no-brainer with today's technology. I mean, they've been sending rovers and robots for a very long time now. So sending something to Moon and Mars is not a problem. Of course, by default or by association, that also means that sending a person to the Moon and Mars is not impossible. However, knowing how fragile and how receptive life is to space flight and then space conditions on the ground, I think a lot of work needs to be done at a cell level, possibly animal model level, to understand better. And the next or upcoming trips to Moon and Mars will ensure a high degree of safety or a good level of quality of life, so to say. So that is what I foresee for the astronauts that will be leaving in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time. I think the more data that you get back, also so again, we learn a lot lessons from medicine. I mean on Earth, we've been following disorders for the past 100 years or more, okay, learning from our ancestors. I mean, space exploration or people on the moon has been done in the 60s and 70s, and then there was a very wide gap, and now we are sending again in 2024. I mean, this doesn't bode well in terms of evidence or data or results of how we can how to say discuss the physiology, the parameters, the biochemistry, the genetics of a person who will be going there, who will be staying there for a week, for a month, for 3 months. I mean, have we ever studied gene expression in the context of moon space or Martian space? Do we know, hand on heart, whether some form of alien genes who we think that right now in our genome, these genes are unknown or untouched or silent? Do we know? Someone knows if these genes suddenly activate or in response to a stress become active? Or the opposite is true? Are there genes that after a certain period of weeks or months, which are important on Earth, could it be that on Moon, on Mars, these become redundant or switched off or repressed? Would that pose a problem if those astronauts are coming back to Earth? I mean, these are very serious questions, which we don't hear too much about. And I think this needs to be seriously looked at to ensure a very exciting space exploration future.
Well, that triggered a whole nother thought. I know we're over time. I hope I'm not keeping you to so I'll try to keep this short. But um in the poles of the moon, there's craters, and there's no atmosphere on the moon. So if you're in the shadow, it's extremely cold. And over billions of years, water ice has accumulated in these areas, and it's like extremely frozen. But I'm also wondering, maybe over those same billions of years, things have been hitting the earth and kicking up genetic material. Some of that could be, frozen in like this 200 degree minus Celsius area and maybe
Yeah.
well preserved. I'm
Yes.
just, I'm just people are looking at these thinking great sources for hydrogen and oxygen, but I
Yeah.
think we need to go there with the sense of there may be way more interesting things
Yes,
that are
indeed.
preserved
And
there.
I think this is interesting because it's like in my mind, it's like I'm picturing an army or a large number of droids or rovers. And now we've been hearing, I think there must be at least 3 or 4 different missions of sending these mini rovers on the moon to drive around the moon surface, identify pockets of water, drill and sample the water. Uh, I mean, that is a huge feat, and it is a very extremely exciting avenue for research. And these simple things of looking at some possible nucleic acid or some form of organic molecules, it's very much doable. I believe to an extent this might also have been done using the rovers on Mars. I think on a certain level, they might be looking at the composition of minerals or or the molecules that they find, although I'm not privy to the details. So there's no reason why this won't be done in the craters or in the frozen caps of the moon. I believe, talking about frozen poles, I believe Mars has now also been confirmed to have certain craters or lakes that contain frozen water. So that is extremely exciting, extremely exciting.
Yeah, definitely. But one thing about Mars though is it does have an atmosphere and it's constant dynamic, whereas
True,
the moon I feel like is more like a lockbox.
yeah,
Once something makes it into these permanently shadowed areas, it is trapped, and you might
true,
have this record of millions, hundreds of millions of years
true.
of
In
solar
fact, I
activity.
wonder, this would be an interesting avenue of research. I am not a geologist, but I am aware how geologists on Earth study the different layers that we find on Earth's crust. I wonder, doing such an exercise on the moon, what would the findings be as you go deeper down into the layers? I mean, sometimes, I mean, this is silly or it's interesting, but I mean, we also find fossils of extinct species or life. The further down we go, it would be interesting to see the same or what's happening uh, on the moon and other planets.
Definitely. Well, Joseph, thank you so much for your time. And it's really exciting to hear about your research that you're doing. And
Thank you.
anything you want to add before we close the call?
I think I exhausted most of my thoughts or things. Of course, I would like to, how to say, I would be lying if I say I am not very excited about Malta's mission to the ISS. So here I would like to mention perhaps a couple of people by name. So the main person working physically on the project is a PhD student of mine, Christine Gatt, and also the colleagues who work in a molecular lab. Incidentally, they also work, uh, how do you say, they also work in the pandemic situation in Malta. So they do all the COVID-19 testing work. This project was also realized by one of the ministries here of Foreign and European Affairs. So they are a prime driver of this experiment, and also followed up by the Ministry for Research. And finally, in Malta, we were very excited about this because we also found support from a local biotech company that believed in the project and also wanted to be part of the project itself. So this is Evolve Limited. And I think this idea of academia, university, the private sector, and possibly assisted by governments, it can lead to some really exciting projects, such as this one, Project Maleth. So thank you for letting me say these last couple of words, and we hope for the best.
Absolutely. And I if they're up to it, I would love to talk to them as well.
I will drop a note. Okay.
Well, very good. You have a good rest of your day, and looking forward to seeing a successful mission to the ISS.
Thanks very much. Thanks for your time, and good luck with your interviews. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.